Hi kids, we're back with chapter 8, Boxcar Children, and it's titled The Lumber Camp. Look what the picture is. That'll give you a little reminder of what was happening at the end of chapter 7 while they were all asleep in their tents. The moon was almost as bright as the day. Mr. Hill whispered, "Look out there very quietly." Very slowly, the other tent flaps opened. The children saw a large black bear, but he did not hear or smell them. He did not smell anything but the bacon. Back and forth he swung it and hit it with his big paw. "Don't be afraid, Violet," whispered Alice. "The bear won't hurt us. He's afraid of us." Just then the bacon fell at the bear's feet. Down he went on all fours again. He lay down and began to chew on the slab of bacon. "Oh, thought Benny. "There goes my bacon." Just then Mr. Hill flashed a light in the bear's face. The bear jumped up and ran off into the woods as fast as he could run. "Didn't he look funny?" laughed Benny. "But he left our bacon behind." "That was a wonderful sight," said Henry. "I'm certainly glad that Mr. Hill happened to wake up." They were soon asleep again. They did not know that Joe had asked Mr. Hill to come because he could show them a big black bear. They did not know that Mr. Hill and the bear were good friends. The bear knew he would find food wherever Mr. Hill was. The next morning, Mr. Hill said he and Joe made a fire. "And then I must leave you after breakfast. When you start off, you'll soon come to a lumber camp." "I wish you would leave that baker to wash the dishes in," said Benny. "Yes, I brought it for you," said Mr. Hill with a smile. He washed the bacon and cut it into thin pieces. Soon it was cooking in the pan over the fire. Hot cereal and canned milk seemed delicious in the cold morning air. Mr. Hill made quick bread in the little baker. As soon as the bread was done, the children began to hear many blue jays in the trees. "They want our breakfast," said Mr. Hill, looking down. "Wait until we sit down and then see how near they will come to us. Throw some pieces on the ground." The air was full of blue jays. 6 or 7 beautiful birds flew to the ground. The children could almost touch them. "Come on, everybody," said Benny at last. "I want to see that lumber camp." He began to pick up the dishes, making the birds fly back into the trees. Jessie laughed. "What a housekeeper you are all of a sudden," she said to Benny. "Let's all help." Soon the camp was clean again. Everything was packed in the canoes. Mr. Hill gave them each a push. "Thanks, Mr. Hill," said Joe to his old friend. "Thanks for everything," Jessie called back as the 2 canoes went smoothly down the lake. The children waved until Mr. Hill turned and went into the woods. "He was nice, wasn't he?" said Violet. Joe laughed. "All Maine guides are nice, Violet." The fish were jumping here and there in the water beside the canoes. "Oh, can't we fish today, Joe?" asked Benny. "We'll have to go fishing," said Joe, "unless we want to eat beans for 3 days. When we get around 2 or 3 looks, we'll stop and fish." 2 or 3 what?" said Benny. "Looks," replied Joe. "See that turn in the lake? You can't see around it yet. They call that a look." "That's a good name for it," said Jessie. "What do we fish with?" "Didn't you see the fishing rods Mr. Hill brought us?" "Yeah, he brought us 2, 1 for each canoe. We can take turns fishing." "We fish with flies," Joe told them. "Not real flies. I have a box of gray ghosts in my pack. They look like real flies to the fish, so they go after them and then we catch them." The canoes passed the next look and the next. Then Joe called back to Henry, "Want to stop and fish?" "You bet," called Henry. "You'll have to show us how." "Alice knows how," called Joe. He stopped paddling. "We'll show you and Violet." The two canoes floated together as Joe and Alice each put a pretty gray ghost fly on their line. Then Joe whipped his line out over the water. "That's great, Joe," said Benny. "Isn't it easy? When you get a fish, let me try." "Sure," said Joe. "Sit still now." "Oh, look," said Jessie. "You've got a fish, Alice. Pull it in." "Not so fast," answered Alice. "You have to play these fellows." She pulled her line in very slowly and carefully. Everyone watched her land the large fish and take it off the hook. Then Joe caught one. Benny could hardly wait. "Now it's my turn." "Right," said Joe. "You saw me whip the line over the water. Now you try." Benny took the rod. He lifted it just as Joe had done. Whip went the line, but it did not go out over the water. It went backwards over his head. "Look out!" Joe cried to Alice, but he was too late. The hook was caught in her hair and pulled her hair over her face. Oh my goodness, it's lucky it didn't go into her head. Have any of you ever seen fly fishing? It looks like it could be something that could be dangerous. "Oh, Alice, your pretty smooth hair," said Violet. "I'm sorry, Alice. I didn't know how to do it." "Never mind," said Alice. "I ought to have been watching. Everyone misses the first time. Violet will soon get the hook out for me." Violet leaned over at once and worked the hook out. "Don't do that again, Benny," she said. "It's not as easy as it looks." "You better let Joe do the fishing." "No, not at all," Joe answered. "Let him try again. He ought to learn." Benny fished and fished, but he found it worthwhile when he finally had caught 3 trout. He looked at every spot on the fish as though he'd made it himself. That must mean he was very proud. At last Joe said, "We have enough fish now. The men at the lumber camp will want to feed us, but it's nice to have our own food too." "See the logs in the water over there," said Alice. The men at the camp roll the logs in the water and they float down by themselves. When the children started off, they began to hear the sound of axes. Soon they could hear a great crash and a tree fell. At last they heard a lumberman calling to them, "Hi, hi!" They all waved to him. "Paddle in, Henry," said Joe. "We'll stay here tonight." The men seemed very glad to see them. Right away he asked them to stay to dinner. "Yes, we'll be glad to stay for dinner," said Joe. "We have a lot of fish here, but we'd like to put up our tents in your camp for the night." "Fine, fine," said the man who was the boss. "Hi, Cookie. We have company." The cook laughed. "Come on in. Stay as long as you want. You like beans?" Benny went up to the cook. "We love beans, but we got a lot of fish. I'll show you the ones I caught." "You can't tell them apart," said Henry. "Oh, yes, I can. I caught 3, and I know every single one of them. I caught this one, and this one, and this one." "They look just alike to me," said Cookie with a smile. "Cook them up for the little boy, Cookie," said the boss. "Fix them up." When dinner was ready, Cookie let Benny ring the bell for supper. The lumbermen came crashing through the bushes. They're always in a hurry when they hear their dinner bell. The men made room for the visitors. There were 3 tables full of people. Baked beans and quick bread made a fine dinner. After dinner, the boss said, "You show the visitors how we cut the trees, Bill." "Bill," whispered Violet to Joe. They all looked to see which man was Bill. But they knew right off it was not the Bill they were hunting for. He was far too young. That afternoon went by quickly. After their supper of cooked fish, they went to bed in their own tents. The lumbermen had little log houses. "Don't be surprised if you hear porcupines," said the boss. "They like the grease from cooking. They come around almost every night." "What do they sound like?" said Henry. "They sound like pigs. They squeal and they chew, and when they chew, it sounds like someone sawing wood." When the camp was quiet, Henry woke up. He thought it was morning and the men were sawing, and then he heard loud squeals and said to himself, "Porcupines." But the squeals had wakened everyone else, and all the tent doors were open now. "What a noise," whispered Jessie. "Where are they?" "See that ball?" asked Alice, "right by the table?" "That's a porcupine. He's chewing the table to get to the grease." Kids, do you remember when we were measuring out the length of porcupine quills? When we were doing some self-directed study about animals and where did porcupines come from and where did they live? Do you remember we found that one type of porcupine? I think it was in Africa that had 1 meter long quills, but of course not in North America. They don't have them that long in North America. "See that ball?" asked Alice, "right by the table? That's a porcupine. He's chewing the table to get the grease." There were 5 porcupines in all, eating and squealing, and when the children had watched them for a long time, Joe said, "We must get our sleep, children." Then he flashed a light at the porcupines. They all rolled into tight balls and kept very still. But when Joe flashed the light again, they uncurled and went hurrying off in the woods. "Well," said Jessie, lying down again, "we see our most interesting sights in the middle of the night." "I hope they won't come back," said Alice, "because Joe says tomorrow's going to be a hard day." But even Joe had no idea how hard the next day was going to be. That is the end of the chapter. What a wonderful ending to the chapter to make you want to tune in for chapter 9. Let's go through that again. But even Joe had no idea how hard the next day was going to be. What do you think is going to happen? Can you make some predictions about that? I'll be interested to see them. See you again soon.